I am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got a special guest coming from Florida. We've got Jesse Haskins in the house. Jesse, tell us a little bit more about you and your law practice, and whereabouts are you located there in Florida?
I am located in Tampa, Florida, and I love food very much. My wife says there is no person who loves food more than I do. So after practicing law most of my career with the for the state of Florida, first with Department of Financial Services, then the Attorney General's office, I decided to go off and dedicate my law practice to the needs of local food systems.
So Jesse, tell us a little bit more about, like you said that you love food, and I know that you're practicing food and agricultural law there in Tampa. But tell me more about your story on why you decided to even become a lawyer in the first place.
I decided to become a lawyer. I have to admit, first, I do enjoy arguing with people, but I also think law is a great way to be able to consider both the policy aspects and to use that and see how it impacts people's lives, and to use that to try to improve the lives of clients, and especially now, I think that agricultural communities across the country are facing a lot of issues in light of the crisis going on. But I think law is really a good way to respond to those kinds of needs.
So Jesse, I know we recently had a Zoom meet and greet where I got to learn a little bit about your law practice. And I know today we're kind of focused in the conversation on community supported agriculture, but can you tell us a little bit more about your law practice, the specific things that you offer clients there in the Florida greater area?
Yes, my practice is a virtual practice. So I serve growers, ranchers, every entity that has something to do with our food system in both Florida and North Carolina, where I am also licensed. So they can talk with me over the phone, over video conference. When we aren't in the middle of a pandemic, I also do site visits as well. And I handle as a one-stop shop all the legal needs of the agricultural community, from business formation to what I call community partnerships, such as community-supported agriculture, dealings with other entities such as restaurants, and administrative law, which covers basically everything that has to do with dealing with government, such as USDA appeals, Greenbelt legislation as far as tax classification is concerned, workers' compensation.
So at the very infancy of my law practice, I too had a virtual office. I started my law practice out of a studio apartment on the Upper East Side, and had a virtual law office downtown. But that was before it was so vogue. Nowadays, I feel like everybody is kind of forced to have a virtual law practice. So what are some of your favorite things in your in the way that you're able to offer virtual services to farmers and other segments of the agriculture industry?
Well, I think it's more convenient for everybody involved. I enjoy not having to make the commute to an office myself. And I think the clients also would appreciate being able to not have to make the drive over to the lawyer's office and wait in the office. So a virtual practice makes everything a lot more convenient for everybody. And also the ability to respond to inquiries and situations more on demand. A related aspect of my practice isn't just being physically more convenient, but I've also explored different pricing models, such as subscription models, where I'm the essentially general counsel for farmers and ranchers, so that they just know exactly what they're paying, and no matter what happens to them legally, I'll be there for them.
That sounds great. So let's talk a little bit more about CSAs, or community supported agriculture. I first heard of this many years ago. I want to say maybe about 10 years ago, give or take a little bit. I was living in New York City at the time. It was quite popular. And I joined my very first CSA. I think it was called Central Park West or something along those lines. And I went every week, and I got my box of vegetables. I didn't have a choice in what was in that box. I mean, it was my share, and I would sign in, and essentially, if I couldn't go pick up the vegetables at this specific church during this block of time, that I needed to send one of my friends. Is that how you would describe a CSA to those people that aren't familiar? I don't know exactly how my experience was to other models.
I think the heart of the CSA idea is where the customer wants to support their local food system. So they're actually investing in their farmer. And when they put in that initial subscription of however much it is for the season, they're basically saying, we're going to stick with this farmer through thick and thin. So no matter what happens in the season, if there's crop failure, that farmer is still going to need our support. And by the same token, if there's a bumper crop, the customer is going to be able to enjoy that extra bounty of produce. So a CSA it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And it really represents more of a partnership between eaters and farmers, more than a sort of traditional farmer-customer relationship, where as a customer, when you order something on Amazon, for example, you just want the product. You don't care so much about the supplier. You just want the guarantee. You know exactly what you're getting. And as you said with the CSA, you just get the box. And you're doing that because you're supporting the farmer and because you want to invest in that.
I do want to be clear, and Jesse, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, that although CSAs are most widely used with vegetables, I've seen meat and egg, CSAs. I think I've got a friend in Philadelphia. She was telling me the ones that there was a nearby farmer that had a pie CSA, and another farmer that had some jams and jellies. So they are used, I believe, in several different commodities. Is that correct?
Yes. That is right. I think there's a lot of room for creativity as far as what could be offered in these CSA programs.
I'm hungry for a pie CSA like right about now. So tell me more about what really motivates consumers to buy a share or a subscription, right, to a CSA. I know that you mentioned about supporting that farm. Do you think that that's really the sole motivation for the consumer?
The primary motivations tend to be more individualistic. There is concern for the farm, but what the community member is really looking for is healthy food, fresh food, delicious food. Those are the overriding factors, even though there's still the sort of secondary considerations of more community-minded motivations as well.
So conversely, what are the benefits for the farmer for his or herself?
I'm sorry?
What are the benefits on the other side for the farmer for participating in CSAs?
The most obvious benefit is what a lot of businesses get when they open themselves up to investment, and that's an infusion of capital. Another benefit, though, is the opportunity for the farmer to offload some of that risk of crop failure and other risks. So that's shared and spread out by the entire community, by the entire CSA community. So that if in the event something goes wrong, crop failure, for example, it's not going to be so devastating on an existential level on the farmer or any other one person. There's a third benefit as well, and that is the opportunity to cultivate a core group of community members. These aren't just the people who are willing to part with their money for a CSA program, but these are the people who are actually enthusiastic about donating their time, their expertise, and maybe some extra money as well to help out the farm. And they do this by building up a group, getting customers more involved through the CSA program. And CSA programs that have that core group of investors, they make $10,000 more annually to their bottom line.
So Jesse, when I participated in my CSA for a growing season or two, I had to pay at the beginning of the season, right, before I received any food. Is that the typical model with CSAs? Is that the customers, basically pay for their share, their subscription at the beginning?
Yes, the customer will pay everything at the beginning. There are, again, variations on this theme. If it is financially prohibitive for certain community members, for example, it could be done in installments as well. But it should be clear, especially to those customers who pay in installments, that they've already committed to making the full payment. They're just making installments because that's all their financial situation allows.
Right. And I know that some CSAs have a different price points, like they'll have a full share subscription, or you can get like a half subscription or share. Is that right? In some cases? Okay.
Yes, they're a full share, a half share. There can be different types of price points to suit different, as far as how much food people feel comfortable eating, how much they're willing to spend. There could be a menu of different options.
So Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there are some of the, it's not SNAP. I want to say it's some variation there of maybe it's WIC or something that could be used at farmers markets, right? And I'm wondering if there's any of, what was historically called food stamps that could be used for CSAs. Is that a possibility? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I know with respect to SNAP benefits, the catch with CSA programs is that in general, the SNAP program requires that food be produced at the same time that it's being received. There is one exception in the federal regulations to this, and that is if we are dealing with what's called a nonprofit food cooperative purchasing venture. That isn't really defined anywhere. It probably would help to be a nonprofit or for a CSA program to partner with a nonprofit. But there are ways perhaps by partnering with organizations, especially organizations that are for example, a consumer cooperative that would be able to provide the extra flexibility. But even then, that's only allows the nonprofit venture to receive payment up to 14 days in advance.
So when you're talking to clients of yours that either have a CSA or are thinking about starting a CSA program on their farm, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 potential liability issues that may affect them that they need to watch out for?
First, be careful that you're not actually selling something that could be perceived by the government as securities. And this means don't offer discounts or credit, because then it would seem that that the customer is actually getting money in return for putting in an investment. So if we're talking about gift cards or giving credit, that's a legal gray area. The safer way to go would be to simply offer that share in the form of food, and not to mix it in terms of other more financial sounding incentives.
Mm-hmm. What are some, what would you say are like the biggest pieces of advice that you would give to CSA farmers to mitigate any risk that they would have with that or with other liability concerns?
You also need to have a written contract in place. That's really important, not just from an attorney from a legal perspective, but also from a customer relation perspective, because we've gotten so used as customers to being able to have that guarantee and then demanding a refund if we don't like what we get. And so I think it starts with a conversation with the customer that this is what community supported agriculture is about. Tell the customer straight up that they are agreeing to give money to help the farm no matter what happens that season, and back it up, reinforce it with a contract. The contract should have a total price of what the customer is going to pay, an idea of what the customer is going to get in return. The contract itself should probably be somewhat educational in nature, discussing what crop failure is, that it's not the fault of the farmer, that it happens as a result of nature not being kind, and perhaps go into more detail about that. And most importantly, have in there that the sale is final.
So to talk a little bit more about that CSA agreement, and by the way, I know that there are a lot of farms that are doing CSAs and they don't have any kind of contract whatsoever with their subscribers. What else do you recommend that should really be set forth in that CSA agreement?
In addition to a description of the price, the quantity, the risk of crop failure, that all sales are final, there could also be in there a provision to essentially agree that if there is some issue, to try to amicably resolve those differences first. And there should also be in there a spelling out the pickup procedures in there, exactly what happens when customers are expected to pick up their food, and what happens if they do not do that. So that is another aspect that should be spelled out in the written CSA agreement.
Yeah, I think that that's great. A great addition to the contract. I think a lot of people really need to sit down with their lawyer to make sure that they really think through all the legal issues. When you say resolve issues amicably, are you talking about an alternative dispute resolution clause, like such as we're going to go to mediation and have a conversation with a neutral third party before anybody sues anybody in court? Is that what you're talking about?
It's really what the parties are comfortable with. I think that would be the ideal, but it could also be as simple, and this, I recognize this may not be enforceable, but it does actually make customers and parties feel more comfortable if it just says that the farmer and the customer are going to have a talk about what's going on first, instead of saying to each other, I'll see you in court. That may not actually resolve anything. And there still may be litigation, but at least the parties have the comfort of knowing that they are going to try to avoid litigation, and that can be psychologically very reassuring as well.
So Jesse, I know that when CSAs just were first starting, and at least, whenever I was living in New York City, I'm not sure how things are being done right now, but one of the hot topics that was somewhat controversial was the issue with volunteers. Like subscribers would then volunteer on the farm, or perhaps they would volunteer for a reduced or free share. Is that still going on? And, what should farmers who are considering this, watch out for from a legal standpoint?
It is still it is a flat out problematic area. And I think it would be difficult to be 100% sure if you're going that volunteer route. But I think that one approach that is promising is to consider organizing a CSA as a nonprofit. And to be clear from the beginning, a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't make money. I mean, it is possible to even make more money. A nonprofit just means that the farmer is going to give up control over the organization. There's going to be a board of directors involved that's going to decide how much the farmer is going to get. But at the same time, that opens it up, especially if the nonprofit applies for 501c3 status as an educational organization that provides education about agriculture and gardening.
So is it your recommendation then that farms should at least consider and have a conversation with their ag lawyer about the possibility of having a not-for-profit arm if they're looking at incorporating a CSA?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's good to know.
I'm sorry?
No, that's good to know. So what do you think that the interplay is between CSAs and farmers that decide to use other direct farm marketing mechanisms such as roadside stands and farmers markets?
I think farmers markets, especially, and roadside stands, are a really good complement to CSA programs, and that I see them as a part of a sort of a funnel, because the bottom line is there are a good number of people who are mildly interested in local agriculture, but are not yet ready to make the commitment for a CSA program where they're putting in a substantial amount of money for an entire season. And there may be people who want local food, but hate purple carrots. And those are the kinds of people that the farmers market and roadsides would be especially well suited for. And as they go to the farmers market more, go to the roadside stand more, they may grow more enthusiastic about local food systems and the farm in particular. And then at that point, if they show more interest in getting involved, then they may be ready to graduate to a CSA type commitment.
So when we started this podcast, we were talking about the different kinds of CSAs, right? We have vegetable CSAs. Sometimes vegetable CSAs are, summer, summer, and then the other one might be like a fall, vegetable CSA, meat and egg. I've seen dairy CSAs, pies, or other processed foods. Are there any legal issues that people should think about if they have a certain type of a CSA, or are there increased liability issues if you're selling things like milk and meat versus vegetables?
Yeah, in general, meat, milk, eggs are subject to more extensive food safety regulations. Several states do have cottage industry laws, but at least in Florida, those do not include items such as meat. So again, especially if they're expanding to other areas outside of produce that are potentially dangerous, that's where it becomes especially important to consult with a lawyer about the food safety implications.
And when you say cottage laws, you're talking about cottage food operation laws, which would be like
Yes.
making processed foods in your kitchen essentially and selling them direct to the consumer. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I think there may be some state variations as far as how cottage food is defined and what constitutes processed. But yeah, in general, when we're talking about cottage food, we're talking about processing safe food on the premises.
I just wanted to give a shout out for one particular publication that I love on cottage food operation law, and I hope that now that I say it on this podcast, that is actually still there. But Harvard has a food law and policy clinic, and they have some outstanding resources. And one of the resources that they had was basically a comparative analysis of states' cottage food operation laws. Not every state has those laws, and so I know that we have listeners all over the country, and I just wanted to note that resource. So Jesse, we are in the middle of a pandemic, as I am here from my house, and I have a shelter-in-place order here in Illinois. So how has COVID-19 affected the direct farm marketing markets and CSAs?
CSAs, from a customer perspective, there is a heightened interest in community-supported agriculture programs. I think COVID's really kind of has two forces. The first is essentially being scared of industrial food, and for good reason. And so people are having, in general, a renewed interest in more local food systems. The second is a matter of convenience. The CSA programs, especially those that have arranged home delivery or contactless pickup, have been especially successful because it's more convenient, it's more safe than going out. And I haven't been to a grocery store myself, but from what I read on the front lines, it is not a good place to be right now, and a lot of customers recognize that. So it is a great time actually to organize the ESA program.
So Jesse, two final questions, and then we'll let our listenership hear how to reach you. But first, what has been sort of the highlight of this pandemic, so to speak, where we're all sort of at home and social distancing, and what are you most looking forward to on the other side of all of this, when we're all able to go out and resume our quote normal life, if that happens again?
I think the highlight is the crisis, I guess, to look at the silver lining, is forcing us to reconsider the way we eat, the way we live, and I would hope that especially when we're talking about a renewed interest in community-supported agriculture and local food, this is the start of a long-term permanent trend that isn't just about fright and alarm over coronavirus, but also a reawakening of a potential pleasant future we could be going down. At the same time, I am looking forward to going out and actually getting out to the farmers market so I could have more pie.
Yeah. Jesse, it's funny that you bring that out about food, because for about the first month that I was working from home, I was like panic shopping wine, and I was ordering so much food, food delivery. I was not eating very healthy at all. And for the last almost 3 weeks, I've been doing a round of Whole30 where I've basically only been eating fruits, vegetables, and protein. That's it, no alcohol. And I feel great. And anyway, it's been a very reflective time for me. So I certainly resonate with those comments about about the silver lining being reconnecting with the food that we put into our bodies. Jesse, how can people find you? Are you on the interweb?
Yes, my website is jhaskinslaw.com. That's jhaskinslaw.com. I also have pages on Facebook and Twitter. My email is jesse@jhaskinslaw.com.
Well, thank you for coming to the podcast. I enjoyed our conversation.